The more things change, the more they stay the same. Brian Michael Bendis debuts in Man of Steel #1, and we take a look at exactly what's going on. I'm Stan, and this is Detail Comics. What's up, everybody? This is an irate review, a show where I go over a comic book, its story, its art, give you my impressions, and let you know whether it's something you should go back to the comic book shop for or not. Make sure you subscribe to get more of these every single week. The book that I want to talk about right now is Man of Steel #1, which is the beginning of a 6-part miniseries from Brian Michael Bendis, and it's his debut into the world of DC. Other than a few short stories inside DC Nation #0 and Action Comics 1000, this is really the kickoff to his Man of Steel story, his Superman kind of soiree. So let's dive in and see what he's got in store for us. The time has finally arrived for Brian Michael Bendis to debut inside his first full comic book writing Superman, and that is Man of Steel #1, the first part of the 6-issue miniseries that is going to bring Superman into his current status inside the DCU, or at least the current status of him with Brian Michael Bendis at the helm. But we don't start off with Superman, we start off on Krypton, or at least dealing with Krypton many, many years ago. And what we see is we see Rogol Zaar inside this kind of group of holographic or, some sort of projection, and he's dealing with a lot of different elders of the DC universe. You can see a Guardian in there, and he makes his case as to why Krypton should be destroyed. It's a virus spreading out into the galaxy, consuming valuable resources and dominating other societies that it interacts with. And he sees it as something that can't be stopped, so the only solution is the eradication of the entirety of Krypton. They're far too advanced. They will not buckle under these threats. They will not surrender. The only thing is cleansing. They need to destroy everything, which is a really radical kind of perspective when it comes to an entire race of people. As we jump back to Metropolis in the current day, we actually see the interactions of a few different people, particularly Killer Moth as well as Firefly, and they're in Metropolis. And you're wondering, why are they in Metropolis? They're normally Batman and Gotham villains, but it seems like Firefly at least has an idea exactly what's going on. He's telling Killer Moth, keep your voice down, man. He can hear you. He listens for certain words. You're hitting all his triggers, and he knows that Superman is somewhere up in the sky listening for these kind of interactions across the city so that way he can intervene and stop things. And we see this just flash of blue, yellow, and red as all of a sudden they're outside the building, and you see Killer Moth and Firefly in the hands of Superman as he drags them off to place them in police custody. There's a few moments of witty banter with a dash of sarcasm from Superman, which might seem a little bit foreign, but it's definitely a Brian Michael Bendis flair as he throws his own style into the writing, and it's not necessarily unwelcome in that respect. But the other thing is that when we see the inner monologue, the next page, after he's already done his duties and dropped off these villains, he sits there and he's listening into the city. And instead of focusing on where the screams are and where these other events are taking place, he catches a cover song, a girl singing to her friend where her voice cracks in all the right places. He listens to the humanity of the actual city itself, which is a very different take, or at least a bit more introspective take on where Superman is and how he deals with the average day-to-day life of interacting with the Metropolis and keeping it one of the safest cities in the world. Of course, this song that this girl's been working on is interrupted by this scream that pierces through the veil and brings Superman bearing down on this building that is on fire. He flies up, he saves a woman hanging out of the window, and there's more for him to do. He makes his way to the 17th floor. He sees a girl cowering there with puppy dogs, so it's just one of the cutest things that Superman could possibly save, and instead of just flying out of the building at breakneck speed, he covers them up because he's concerned about how he might hurt them. The conscious decisions that Superman has to make while saving the individuals in Metropolis and maintaining the status quo. As he returns the girl and puppies to her mother, he flies up and billows his lungs, pulling the fire onto himself and then releasing it out into the sky, consuming everything, consuming this gigantic blaze and lighting up Metropolis's night sky with this roiling ball of clouds. And that leaves almost nothing for the fireman to do, but as he goes in, he tries to investigate, tries to see the source, tries to see the cause of exactly what's going on. He hears the voice of his son in the background, ultimately ending up distracted before interacting with the fire chief. And the conversation that Brian Michael Bendis puts into this scenario is an interesting one. Melody Moore, this lovely redheaded woman, she asks Superman if he wants a job. He's got multiple jobs. She wants to get the facts so that way she can determine exactly what's going on with the fire. But she says other things like, am I taller than Wonder Woman? And it's like, that is it's the inane parts of the conversation that he's interjecting into there. It's things that don't necessarily move Superman forward, but they add an air of normalcy to his interactions with individual people. And as he flies away, and she obviously is enamored with him, it's like, so good to see you, Superman. As he smiles and smirks back at her with her understanding that the super hearing probably heard everything, which she's a little embarrassed about, but not necessarily a ton. He goes back to patrolling the city and making sure the Metropolis is safe. Then we go back, we flash back in time to where Rogol Zaar is on his little destitute planet that seems to be some sort of training ground, some sort of hell for him to stay in there and stay in peak physical condition. But it looks like he is not alone. It's another Guardian with the name Appa Ali Apsa, and he's delivering a message from the Council. While they respect his words, they considered them carefully, they've decided that Krypton is to be ignored. They are not causing any kind of concerns. They are not out there seeking domination. They must be allowed to rise and fall on their own, and this is far too much for Rogol Zaar. He is devastated at this very news, just smashing his way into the rocks and just sitting there in this giant wordless panel that's got this great contrast between what is happening outside and what's happening inside the cave. This man that has defeated so much and weathers so much of a storm and seems to be some sort of agent, some sort of cleaner, some sort of fixer. He goes out there and handles the dirty work of this galactic universal council. He's there and he's been abandoned by the people that he supports. Of course, we go back to now. We see Clark Kent. He's currently at the Daily Planet. He's writing up the article regarding this arson case, and we see Perry and the brand new character that Brian Michael Bendis invented inside DC Nation number 0. But we also see that Lois Lane's visage is still up. We see the photo of Lois and Jon on his desk, and that doesn't necessarily trigger happiness. It triggers sadness. We go back to his memories, exactly what happened a few hours ago. We don't really know. There's no timetable given. But we see Jon, he's growing. He doesn't necessarily fit into his super suit anymore. But Lois, Clark, Jon, they seem to be a happy family inside their apartment inside Metropolis until a giant flash of white light, and that's where we're going to end Man of Steel number 1 before we get into issue number 2, which happens next week. The appearance can be deceiving. He's getting Jon and Lois off the table early on, and this appears to be when he has his interaction with Rogol Zaar. Something about the arrival of this character that has driven his sword into his chest, according to the story in Action Comics number 1000, has to do with the disappearance of his family and exactly what's going on. When it comes to stories like these, it's hard to kind of pin down exactly where Brian Michael Bendis is going. And what we see with Clark, what we see with Superman, the Superman is the main focus, but also how the general public and society interacts with him. And as far as Clark is concerned, he doesn't seem very off base, but he does make Clark, he makes Superman feel a little bit less focused, a little bit more aloof. He tends to absorb and take in everything that's happening around him. He looks like he's the collection of the community that is Metropolis. And that's an interesting concept. As far as the story itself, I think that it's fine. It's a perfectly good introduction, and overall I feel like it's going to get more intense as we get into the action. I'm not necessarily sure what's going to happen with this, but I think that it's something that's going to get me enticed enough to keep on going with it. And that's the important thing. But I want to know what you guys think too, so hit me up in the comments down below and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.